So welcome everyone to the third Pearson Business Book Club. I can see lots of people joining already. I'll just wait a few more seconds just to see if the numbers go up. I've got 2 o'clock. I don't know if anyone's got a different time. Oh yeah, the numbers are going up fantastically now. Excellent. Okay. Hey, I'm going to start. So just in case you don't know, my name is Eloise Cook and I'm the publisher for the professional business lists at Pearson. So I commission books and I work with authors like Simon Horton to develop their content. So you're here for the Pearson Business Book Club, and each month we choose a Pearson business or personal development book and invite the author to discuss it. And so we'll also have a masterclass from them on a key concept from the book. And so this is what you're all here for. Change Their Mind by Simon Horton. So welcome, Simon. Welcome to the book club.
Thank you very much, Eloise. Good afternoon, everybody.
How are you doing?
I'm not bad, but I will say up front that I've been suffering from COVID this last week. Today is my first day of feeling better, but I'm not 100%. So if I do die mid-webinar, at least the viewers will know why, kind of thing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming still, Simon. We really appreciate it. And yes, we will bear that in mind. I know that rates are really high at the moment. So
yes.
We'll see. You know, I know everyone knows someone at the moment that's got it. So if you've not got a copy yet, you can download a sample chapter of Change Their Mind from the book club webpage, and we'll also post the discount code in the chat so you can get 25% off at pearson.com. And please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we'll get Simon to answer these at the end. So just a bit more about Simon. He is a world-renowned negotiations expert, has spent 20 years working with a very impressive client list, companies like ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, UNICEF, Goldman Sachs. I could go on, and he's a visiting lecturer at Imperial College. And he's also the author of the Leader's Guide to Negotiation in our FT Publishing imprint. So I thought I should plug that. And so as usual, we're going to kick off. I'm going to ask you some questions, Simon, and then we'll go into the masterclass. So tell me about, why did you want to write this book?
Yeah, so the first book, The Leader's Guide to Negotiation, that was about a step-by-step process to reach win-win in any negotiation. So I actually believe that most people do want to get a win-win, but they don't think it's possible, because they always kind of think the other person's too tricky or manipulative or untrustworthy or whatever. So I gave them, I kind of gave them a simple, easy to follow, step-by-step process to achieve win-win. And the pushbacks that I often get are, Simon, yeah, great in theory, win-win, but you haven't seen the person I'm negotiating with. Or great in theory, but in my situation, there isn't a win-win to be had. It's zero sum. And both of these pushbacks, are quite fair concerns. But so I did try to address those in the Leader's Guide to Negotiation. But I would still get pushbacks. I would still get people going, yeah, but what about in this situation? And they just come up with more and more extreme circumstances that are never really going to happen. But they were worried that it would. So I thought, okay, for Change Their Mind, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the people who work in extreme circumstances. And what is it that they do? Those people who persuade or influence or negotiate successfully in extreme circumstances on a consistent basis, what is it they do? So I interviewed a whole load of people. I interviewed hostage negotiators. I interviewed people who negotiated peace treaties. I interviewed people hackers. I interviewed people who can persuade across the political divide, you know, that Democrat who can persuade the Republican or vice versa, you know, and these are pretty difficult conversations to be had. So what is it that they did? And one of the interesting things, and many, many other people, all of whom worked in kind of extreme contexts, and one of the interesting things that came out from it was that even in such independent, separate fields, they each quite separately developed pretty much the same model. And that was quite interesting, and kind of, for me, corroborates its validity, that it was independently developed to be the one that works in such extreme circumstances multiple times. It evolved multiple times, if you like. So yeah, so that was why. So let's go to the real extreme circumstances and see what works there.
Yeah, and what I think is really great about the book is it's going to sort of a much wider audience. You know, you might own, if you identify as a leader or aspirationally as a leader, you might buy your first book, but here we're going big and we're going bold. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, it's to persuade your kid to tidy their room or your husband to take the rubbish out as much as your client to sign the deal or whatever. Yeah.
And so was there anything that you were surprised about when you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I always find writing a great learning process. And I think with this, it was less of a surprise, but more of a reminder of, quite simply, how difficult it is. You know, persuading these people, it's not easy. And you know, often as I was writing it, you know, over the 18 months or so of the process, I would find myself in situations where I was trying to persuade or trying to negotiate, and I wasn't getting the outcome that I would want. So I would say to myself, what would the book say in this instance? And then, you know, I'd get a different answer to what I'd been doing before. And quite often, you know, I thought I would be doing it right, but the book would say, no, you've got to do it more. You know, I would say, what would the book say? And the book would say, oh, do X. And I was saying, but wasn't I doing that already? And the book would say, no, you've got to do it more. And I quite often didn't want to. And I'd say, I don't want to do that kind of thing. You know, why do I have to do that? And basically the book would say, well, do you want to get your outcome or not? If you want to get your outcome, do it. If you don't want to get your outcome, fine, go ahead with your outrage. Go ahead with your righteous indignation and your sense of how correct you are, kind of thing. But you won't get your outcome. If you want to get your outcome, actually, you have to go about it differently. And it's really difficult. It's, you know, you've got to manage your ego as much as anything else. And that is very challenging. That's very challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I found it.
Yeah, and you've got to put the work in.
Yes, you've got to put the work in. It's not a magic wand kind of thing. No.
Yeah. And last question for you. So what would you say is the most important thing to consider when trying to persuade someone?
The most important thing to consider trying to persuade somebody, if I'm to boil the book down to one thing, to one sentence, and people can then disconnect from the webinar after that one sentence.
Well, we can wait if you want to hold fire.
No. It really is. It's step into their shoes and understand their perspective, and then put your outcome in terms of their perspective. We are just so stuck in our perspective and our logic and our rationale, and it's obvious, isn't it? And they just don't see it that way. They see it very, very differently. And so when we lead, you know, with our logic, they're just sitting there going, you don't get it. You don't get it. So for us to persuade, we've got to step into their shoes, understand their rationale, put our outcome in terms of their rationale. And that's the only way they'll say, yeah, good idea, let's do it. Any other way, they'll say, you don't get it. So if there's one thing, it's that. But there are many other things to include as well. Yeah,
and you're going to come on to those in a moment. So it's time for your masterclass. And as I've mentioned before, if you've got a question for Simon, please use the Q&A function. and we'll post them to him afterwards. But I will let you take it away, Simon.
Brilliant, cool. Thank you very much, Eloise. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. There, hopefully you can all see that slide. Change their mind, 6 steps to persuade anyone, anytime. And it is a book about ethical influencing, influencing through deep listening and co-creating the solution. And I like that idea that it is about ethical influencing. In the modern world, it seems the most common approaches to influencing are either shouting, which we see on social media, just 2 sides shouting at each other, or manipulation, which we see on online sales and such like, where people manipulate you into buying their product, or lying, which we see in politics. And I don't think that these are good approaches for society. And I think we do need a better approach. And so this is an ethical approach through deep listening and co-creating the solutions, we get better outcomes. What's nice as well is that not only is it an ethical approach and therefore kind of better for the world in general, interestingly, it's also just purely selfish reasons. It's the most effective method, because especially in those extreme circumstances, because why has that person shut down? Why is that person not listening to you? Why are not they buying into your message, even though it's so clear to you that you're right? Well, it's because the lack of trust there, either their lack of trust in you specifically, or the lack of trust that they have built about the world, kind of thing. They don't trust the system or whatever it is. And that's why, if you can get across to them that actually they can trust you, that they can work with you, that they are not under threat by you in any kind of way, that you do have their best interests at heart, if you can get that across to them, then they are going to listen to you. And they are now going to work with you to try and get you your outcome as well. But if you don't get that across to them, you can't expect them to work with you. So this is very much about building that trust. And it's, especially in extreme circumstances, this is what you have to have that trust in place. So let's have a look at the structure of the book. These are the 6 steps. They are 1 chapter per step. Step 1 is aim high, know what you want, be clear about what you want, and be ambitious for that. I'm encouraging you to be ambitious and aim high. Look for clues before you dive in, telling them, before you give your suggestions or make your demands or anything. Do your research, do your preparation. And in that research, you will find clues about how best to frame your message in such a way that that other person is likely to say yes. And then listen, listen, listen. So we're now engaging in the conversation, and we don't start, again, by diving in with our demands. We start by listening and really deeply listening to what's not said, listening to behind the words and such like. Step 4, chapter 4, be strong, be robust in your outcome. We're not saying, be soft and give everything away. We're saying be robust in your outcome. Step 5, co-create the solution. So we've identified what we want. We've listened to them. We now know what they want. Together, work together to solve the problem so that both sides can get the solution, and the solution that suits them. And if it is a solution that suits them, now you can be 100% sure it's going to be implemented in exactly the way you want. If you try to persuade and you force something through simply because you could, well, you can't actually trust you'll get what they signed, what they agreed, because they're not incentivized to implement it. But if they've co-created it and they've fed into what the solution is, they are going to implement the solution. And lastly, say it the right way. So how you frame your message to any given individual or any given audience, you need to use one set of language for one individual or audience, a different set of language for a different individual or audience. How do you know how to say it the right way? Well, you found that through the looking for clues and through the listening and listening and listening. And so looking at this structure in a slightly different way, we can say chapter 1 and chapter 4 are about your outcome. Know what you want, be ambitious, and be strong and robust in that. Chapters 2 and chapters 3 are about understanding their outcome and how they see that situation. And then chapters 5 and chapter 6 is how we put those together and solve that equation so both parties do get the outcome that they want. And again, looking at the structure slightly differently again, chapters 3 and chapters 4, they, if you like, they're the core of the model. The book pivots around those two chapters. And it's, and perhaps this might have been another answer to your question, Eloise, kind of what one thing, perhaps it's two things. It's listen, it's take the soft approach and be robust in your outcome. It's that twin track approach. If we look at hostage negotiators working in extreme circumstances get very good results by taking this softly approach. They're usually called Denzel or Bruce. They're on the phone to the hostage taker and they build that connection and they build the empathy and they build the rapport and they say, I get it, you know, wow, that happened to you. Wow, you must have been furious if that happened to you. I'd have been furious if it had happened to me. And they really build that connection. But at the same time, they are very robust on their outcome. Hostage negotiators don't negotiate. It's a misnomer. They don't say, well, okay, you can kill half the hostages, but release the other half. They're actually very robust on their outcome. And it is that twin track approach about being robust on your outcome, but taking the soft, listening, empathic approach to achieving it that is successful in these situations. So let's go into each of these chapters a little bit more detail. And obviously in the book, tons more detail, lots of tips, lots of tactics and sort of practical advice given. But aim high, know what it is you want. The clearer you know what you want, the more likely you are to achieve it. The easier it is for you to communicate it. The easier it is for them to understand it. The easier it is for them to do it. And know the why as well, the why behind it on both sides, why you want this and why they want that other thing. Because often the problem, the conflict, is at the specific demands. The solution is when you explore the reasons behind the demands, and then you can find a solution. So, you know, I want £1 million. Well, I can't give you £1 million. I haven't got any money. I'm in debt. Oh, well, why do you want £1 million? Well, I think it'll make me happy. Oh, well, maybe there's other ways that can make you happy, kind of thing. So it is not focusing on the specifics, but the reasons behind the specifics that you can get the answers. I'll give you a simple example of that. During the pandemic, my mother was in a nursing home. She's 91, and they obviously restricted viewings. In fact, they stopped viewings. Even when the world opened up again, they still stopped people coming in to visit their parents and relatives. And obviously now the world had opened up, I wanted to visit my mum. I hadn't seen her for 3 months or however long the first lockdown was, and I wanted to visit her. These were, if you like, the last days of my mum, you know, and it's, you know, especially in those times, I wanted to visit her, but they were saying no, it wasn't possible. And when you found out, well, why don't they want visitors in? Well, it's obviously because they don't want people to come in, unsuspectingly bring the virus in, which could spread through a lot of people and cause a lot of damage. These are obviously people in the vulnerable categories. So they were very afraid of that, and that's quite understandable. But once you know that, okay, then there's a solution. So we agreed that I could visit, I just wouldn't go indoors, and I'd talk to my mum through the window. The window would be closed. There was zero chance of transmitting the virus through the glass. And so I could chat with my mum, I could see my mum again, we could have a chat, and they were perfectly safe with their concerns. So knowing the whys behind the asks on each side can help that. You have to ask, don't undersell yourself. Very commonly, we undersell ourselves. So let's say I want a pay rise and I know that I'm worth, I've done my research and I'm definitely worth a 10% pay rise. And I'm thinking, right, tomorrow I'm going to march into my boss's office and I'm going to demand a 10% pay rise. Well, they probably won't agree to a 10%, so I'll demand a 9%. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll demand an 8% pay rise. And then the next morning, we go into the office and say, boss, I demand a 7% pay rise. And we've negotiated ourselves down already by 30% before we've even started the conversation. Don't do this, don't do this. So in fact, aim high, be ambitious, and I encourage you to be ambitious for the other person. In the book, Change Their Mind, I interviewed lots of really impressive people. One of the people I interviewed was a billionaire, tremendously impressive, as you might imagine, very intelligent, tremendously charismatic, very ambitious, all of which you might expect. What was really interesting about this person was how ambitious he was for the other person. He was super ambitious for them. He'd listen to them and hear what they wanted to achieve from the deal. And he'd say, we can get you much more than that. No, 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 come on. We can do much better than that. And then they'd go, oh, that's quite interesting. And now they would be fully on board that project, which would help him get his very ambitious outcome. So by being ambitious for the other person, you get all of the energies aligned, working together to help you achieve your ambitious outcome. Just lots more in the book, by the way, and just for time's sake, I'm not going to go through all of these comments, these points. Chapter 2, look for clues. So we've just identified what we want, great, and typically people then dive into the meeting or write their email or whatever it is and make their demands or give their suggestions or give their advice or whatever. And we want to hold back. We want to plan it. We want to do our preparation. And if we can do that preparation, plan it accordingly, we're more likely to get a successful outcome. We want to think about this person. Who are they? What do we know about them? What is their perspective? As we were talking earlier on, you have to put your outcome in terms of their perspective. You put it in terms of your own perspective, it might work, it might not, but if you put it in terms of their perspective, it is much more likely to work. What else do we know about them? What do we know about their personality type, about their values, about their drivers, and about their emotions, all of these things. These are the things that impact their thinking and their decision making. And everybody is different in this way, but the more we know about that given individual, then the more we can frame our message in such a way for that individual that it's likely to get through. So what do you know of them? And it might be that you know this person really well. Maybe they're a family member or whatever, in which case just think about them, how do you think they see this situation, etc. Or maybe you don't know them that well, but maybe you can do some research. I'll give you an example. I had a sales meeting coming up with a very senior person in a big city law firm. Now, this was a serious organization, and he had a serious position within the organization. I would typically wear a very, maybe a pinstripe suit and maybe a tie. I would dress seriously. But I did my research and I found them on LinkedIn. And from LinkedIn, I went to Facebook and I found them on Facebook. And it turned out that they were the lead singer of a thrash metal band. So I took a different approach. I ditched the tie, got a new tattoo on my neck. No, I didn't. But I did take a different approach from that research. And there's this idea of one of us, in group or out group. And sadly, we have got deep wiring such that if you are one of us, it's easier to persuade, it's easier to influence. If you're one of them, it's harder. If you're in group, it's easier. If you're out group, it's harder. The good news is that human beings are so rich in their identity, is that there is always an overlap to be had. And it's your job to find that overlap. I'll tell you a brilliant experiment that they did that is in the book. They got they got a group of Manchester United fans to come in and write an essay of what it was like to be a Man United fan. And they set it up so that when they left the building, somebody ran past, tripped over, and was in obvious pain. If that person was wearing a Man United shirt, 80% of people went over to help. If they were wearing a Liverpool shirt, 20% of people went over to help. So instantly we're in one of us, one of them territory. I'm a Man United fan, they're a Man United fan, I'll help. I'm a Man United fan, they're a Liverpool fan, I won't help. But the really interesting part of the experiment was in the second phase. And in the second phase of the experiment, they got a similar group of Man United fans to come in and write an essay. I did think it was being a bit ambitious asking them to write an essay, but sorry, that was an aside. I'm not a Man United fan. To write an essay, but this time the essay was about what it was like to be a football fan, not a Man United fan, but a football fan. Now, when they left the building, somebody ran past, tripped over, was in obvious pain. If that person was wearing a Liverpool shirt, 60% of people went over to help, 3 times as many as before, because it was no longer, I'm a Man United fan, they're a Liverpool fan. It's, I'm a football fan, they're a football fan. So we can always find an overlap. And it's your job to find that overlap, and then it's one of us, and life will be easier. You're much more likely to find that win-win outcome that you are after. Chapter 3, listen, listen, listen. So here we are really getting to the core of the model. This is super important. I'm sure you guys are good listeners and you can get better. It's based on the principle that whatever behavior you want them to do, you have to go first. If you want them to listen to you, which you do, then you have to listen to them first. If you want them to listen to you properly and really process what you're saying and really take it on board, and again, you do, then you have to go first. And you have to listen to them and really listen to them properly, process what they're saying, and really take it on board. You can't expect them to do that to you unless you do it to them first. So this is one of those challenging things. You know, we think we've listened, but typically, jump ahead a little bit, it says, listen to understand, not refute. Typically, we listen to refute. We listen to refute. We listen until we hear that thing that we can say, ah, yeah, but. And then we jump on that with our yeah, but. And then they listen in response in exactly the same way we did. They all listen until they can hear something that they can jump on and say, ah, yeah, but. And that's what they do. And then we have a yeah, but argument for as long as the conversation goes on. And nobody ever changes their mind. And we can see this in social media. So one person posts something, somebody else says, yeah, but, somebody else says, yeah, but, and you can scroll down as many pages as you like, and never in the history of social media, excuse me, has anybody ever said, oh yeah, you're right, I hadn't thought of it that way. Because we're not listening properly. So, excuse me, we want to listen to understand, not refute. And then related to this is the idea of psychological safety. Psychological safety. Psychological safety is a bit of a trendy term at the moment, actually. You see it around a lot. And that's good. That's really good because it's a really important concept. Google did a project. You may have come across it. You may not have. A project called Project Aristotle, which was basically an internal research project where they looked across their organization who excuse me, who were the high-performing teams in Google. And then they looked for various other factors that correlated with the high-performing teams. And it turned out that the single most important factor in terms of correlating with high performance was psychological safety, such that every person in that team felt psychologically safe. They did not feel psychologically threatened in any kind of way. They felt respected. They felt valued. They felt that they could contribute at any point, that if they did contribute, it would be listened to, it would be taken on board, it would be considered, it wouldn't be dismissed, it wouldn't be judged, it wouldn't be laughed at, that their contributions would always be considered valuable and would be welcomed. And so if, excuse me, if you want to persuade, if you want to influence, you have to bring psychological safety to the situation. The other person has to feel psychologically safe. Otherwise, their defenses will be down and they will not listen to what you're saying, or they will listen to it in a distrustful way. And that's probably the single biggest thing in these extreme circumstances to get them to open up and really listen to you properly, is that they have got to feel psychologically safe. Otherwise, they won't. Their defenses will be down. Very, very important. It's the concept of unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard. Respect that person, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. Kind of almost, even if they're the worst of the worst, even if they've done the worst of the worst, if you want them to change, actually condemning them as the worst of the worst is your least effective approach. Your best approach to getting change is to still bring unconditional positive regard, even in that instance. So very, very important. Chapter 3 in listening, a lot of it is also about listening for the non-verbals. And, how do we listen to what's not said? It's in the non-verbals. Poker players know this. Poker players will tell you that we leak huge amounts of information all the time. That you could ask me, do I like Donald Trump? And I could say, yeah. Or I could say, yeah. Same verbal content, polar opposite meanings. One was a very sarcastic, yes, i.e. meaning no, and the other one was an affirmatory, an affirmative, whatever the word is, way of saying yes, actually I do, kind of thing. But all of that meaning was in the non-verbals. So a lot of it is about tuning into the non-verbals. Chapter 4, be strong, be strong. And we're saying, let's be clear, be strong so you don't have to use that strength. Precisely so you don't have to use that strength. I often say that it's amazing how collaborative the other person is if you've got a bigger army than them. So, so how do you get that? The pushback I often get is that the other person I'm negotiating with isn't being collaborative, or I can't trust them. Well, one of the ways of making them more collaborative is by projecting strength. And then they're less likely to try anything on. And so you are less likely to have to use strength for that very reason. So one of the interviews I had in the book was with, it's an amazing interview. I have to say, some of the interviews I came out with kind of, humbled by these interviews. This one was by Lord David Owen. Many of you, I'm sure, will know Lord David Owen was Foreign Secretary in the Labour government in the 1970s. In the 1970s, the British government, both the Labour government and Conservative governments, had been negotiating with Argentina over transferring the Falklands or the Malvinas, however you want to call them, to Argentinian governance. And interestingly, both the Labour governments and the Conservative governments had actually wanted to get rid of the Falklands. It was expensive to run. They didn't see much benefit in holding on to it. They were actually trying to get rid of it. The problem was, politically, it wasn't an easy thing for them to do. The Falkland Islanders were very against becoming Argentinian. They had a referendum and it was a 99% vote against becoming Argentinian, and the British people in general and the press were against it as well. But they were trying to find a political way to make it feasible. And then in 1976, Argentina had a military coup, and there was a new government in place, a military government, that were a very aggressive government. Internally, they disappeared thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people with different political views to them. And they made it known very clearly that they were going to invade the Falklands. And it was common knowledge across Argentina that they were going to invade. The Argentinians were all going, yeah, great. In fact, they did invade some outlying islands on the Sandwich Islands, which are just off the Falklands. And on the basis that they were thinking, we'll invade, the British won't do anything about it, and we'll get away with it. So David Owen, what he did is he very quietly sent a small but significant naval task force down there. It was a submarine, 2 frigates, and a couple of support vessels. And he didn't say anything about it, just sent them down there. They were stationed kind of just over the horizon, but they were there to be seen. And the Argentinian military government saw that and said, oh, no, we better not do that. Let's change our plans because the British will respond and we don't want to get in a conflict. And in actual fact, Lord Owen said that the previous couple of rounds of negotiations with the new junta had been very aggressive, very, very difficult rounds of negotiations. And he was expecting the next one to be even worse. And it turned out it went really, really well. They changed their style of negotiation massively and were much more cooperative. So it's the show strength or whatever that might be so that you don't have to use it. And strength can mean many things, be creative about what it means in your context. But at least it means be strong on the outcome and soft on the approach. So we are combining the soft approach with the, if you like, the don't mess approach and the softly spoken, empathetic approach kind of thing. And it's that combination that can often be the thing that works. Other relevant things there, dealing with difficult people. I'm sure you don't have any difficult people in your world, but in that hypothetical instance that you were to, we give you lots of ways of dealing with that. And one aspect of strength is your ability to manage your own self. So we were talking earlier on about managing your ego, managing your emotional response, and kind of stepping outside of the emotion and thinking, well, hold on, is that emotional response going to be my best thing? Is that going to help me get what I want or not? And if it isn't, put that emotion aside and go back to what is it that I want? What's my best way of achieving it? And that's a strength. The ability to do that is a strength. The inability to do that and just go with the emotion because it's stronger than us is a weakness, and it does undermine us getting our outcome in many, many situations. Oops, sorry, I went ahead too far. Chapter 5, co-create the solution. So chapters 1 and 4, we know what we want. Chapters 2 and 3, we found out what they want. So now work together and solve that equation so that both parties can get what they want. It says plan the process collaboratively too. This can be a really useful thing to do. So even before you get to solving the problem, if you work together to plan the process of how you're going to solve the problem, you do that collaboratively, that can be a really nice way, because what you're doing is you're practicing the collaboration, if you like, long before anything contentious comes up. So for example, one extreme situation that I always think about is Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement, almost a miraculous kind of solution. It was 3 years, it was a 3-year process, and it was described by Senator George Mitchell, who was the chair of the process. It was described as 3 years of failure and 1 day of success. Happened to be the last day, so which was the important day, that was the successful day. So 3 years of talks, but even before those talks, there were years of talks about the talks. Between the relevant parties, there were talks, about how those talks would proceed. And even before the talks about the talks, there were secret talks about the talks. And it was that process that enabled to make sure that the final process, the agreement process itself, would go successfully, and what led to what might be called a miraculous outcome. In fact, staying with the island of Ireland, there's another really nice example of how this can be done really, really successfully, even in extreme circumstances. So, so abortion is obviously an extremely inflammatory topic. People on both sides of the table have got very, very strong feelings, really deeply held feelings that connect to really deeply rooted views about life, about purpose of life, etc., on both sides of the table. And to have that conversation across that table can be tremendously inflammatory, can be tremendously difficult to have. And we see in America how not to do it. Roe versus Wade has just been overturned, as we know, and the response to that and so on. And those conversations are not going in the right direction. In Ireland, which you might imagine, has got similarly deeply held views. Ireland is obviously part of the population are very traditional and very religious. And another part of the population have a very are younger, you might say more modern, have a very different set of views and a different set of values. So, and it was embedded in the Constitution of Ireland that abortion was illegal, should be considered as murder. And yet this was obviously a discussion that needed to be had. So they took a different approach. And in 2016, they held a People's Assembly, where they basically got 99 people randomly selected from the population, pretty much picked from the phone book at random. The only criteria was that the demographics of that 99 paralleled the demographics of the wider population of the country in terms of age group, in terms of religious beliefs, etc. And they had a People's Assembly. So they basically, over a number of days across a series of months, those people met up, heard presentations by experts on different aspects of the topic, were given further reading to do, then conducted discussions amongst themselves, facilitated with guidelines that they had to be very respectful, that they had to listen to what the other person was saying and such like. But they were taken through that process, a managed process, and where they were able to have the conversation in a respectful, safe kind of way. And they came to an agreement, despite the fact such different views on, and such deeply held different views on such an inflammatory topic. They came to an agreement, and the agreement that they came to was that there should be a referendum, that it wasn't up to any one of them to decide for the other people, that there should be a referendum, and whatever the referendum says, that's what the country should follow. And so they recommended that to the government, and in 2018, the Irish government held that referendum, and there was a 2/3 majority that the constitution should be changed and that abortion should be legalized. And so that was a much, much better way of managing a a tremendously difficult topic conversation to be had. Chapter 6, the last chapter, say it in the right way. Say it in the right way. So what do we mean by the right way? Well, firstly, it's the when and the where and the how. You know, sort of, if you know that they're always grumpy in the morning, don't ask them in the morning. If you know that they prefer to have the conversation offline, have the conversation offline. And offline and less formal is often the best place. You know, sort of face-to-face is generally better than email. In the coffee shop is generally better than their office or yours. And then kind of work with what they give you. So all of that stuff that we've found out from the looking for clues and the listening and listening and listening, all of that stuff that we found out, how they make their decisions. You know, as they're talking, all of that, they are telling you how they make their decisions. They are telling you how their brain works. Wait, you just use that. You just work with that. And you're much more likely to get the outcome that you're after. So I'll give you an example of this. So I used to be very into hiking and mountaineering and that kind of stuff. And on a cold, rainy winter's day, there's nothing I would like more than hiking up a good steep mountain with a pack on my back. And my girlfriend viewed it differently. I don't understand why, but she had a different perspective on she had different feelings, let's say that, about the prospect of hiking up a mountain on a cold, rainy winter's day. And so every weekend, you know, well, she was more of a fashionista. She was more of a let's watch Sex in the City kind of person. So every weekend when the discussion came up about what shall we do this weekend, you know, I'd say, why don't we go for a hike? And you know, it generally didn't go well. But I did know that she had a couple of friends who liked hiking as well. And she was a social person and she liked seeing those friends. So, and I also knew that what she did like was that feeling of coming back from the walk, and we're now indoors, we're now warm, and we've taken off our wet jackets, and we're now nice and warm indoors, and we're going to snuggle up on the sofa and watch a film or something like that. And I know she did like that kind of cozy feeling. So that's how I would present it, rather than say, hey, let's go for our hike. There's a great mountain over there. It's about 20 miles to get there and it's really steep. It'll be lovely. The weather's really great. It's raining all day. Rather than saying those terms, which are the terms that would excite me, I would say, hey, how about we go for a walk? I wouldn't even use the word hike. I'd say walk or stroll or something. I don't know. I can't remember precisely. But I'd say, hey, let's go for a walk. Why don't we get your friends to come along as well? And then when we get back, I'll cook dinner, you choose a film, and we'll snuggle up and watch that. So I'd put it in terms of the things that I knew she liked. Because interestingly, I know you're probably thinking, you manipulative so-and-so, Simon. Interestingly, I knew she did like the hiking. I knew she did like it, except for that wasn't her first thought. Her first thought was, it's going to be wet, it's going to be cold, why can't we go shopping instead or something? And what I had to do was to get her thoughts to leapfrog that first thought to the bits about it that she did like. And I knew she did. Just once she'd gone over that first automatic reaction, she would enjoy it. And so for me to get my outcome, that's what I would have to do. I try not to be too manipulative in my relationships. So that's it. Chapters 1 to 6, steps 1 to 6, aim high, be ambitious with them, look for clues, do your research. Listen. They are telling you all the time about how to persuade them, what they're trying to achieve. Be strong, be robust in your outcome. Work together with them to find the solution that they want and that you want, and frame it in the right way. Use the language that they have given you, and putting all of these together, you're most likely to get your outcome. Cool. So I'm happy to hand over for any Q&A. Have we got any Q&A, Eloise?
Wow, thank you, Simon. That was really good. I've made some notes myself. Even though I've read the book, but with those stories that you were talking about, they're often on quite sort of difficult and emotive subjects. I think it just goes to show that these skills are really useful in so many different situations, and there's always an overlap, and the importance of feeling psychologically safe and tell them a great story, which is what you've done for us today with all the examples you've given. And so yes, we've got some questions that have come in. So let's see, here's the first one. So they agree with what you said, and they have a question about in the same way as you say social media is about listening, influencers are hugely persuasive nowadays, and this goes some way to change our need for cognitive processing. So how do we encourage more critical thinking, or do we need to change our approach to persuasion for some people? That's a big one.
That is quite a big one. So social media isn't about listening. No, that's right. Influencers who work on surface level imagery. Yes, indeed. We buy into their glamour or their aura, or just the fact that they've got 10 million followers already. Wow, they must be really good. And so we buy into that and are persuaded by that. Yes, and this goes some way to change our need for cognitive processing you discuss. So how do we encourage more critical thinking instead of buying into the aura, instead of buying into the glamour, etc.? How do we encourage more critical thinking? Or do we need to change our approach to persuasion for some people? Well, so it's a really good question. And I think for me, see, influencers, guess what? They're really good influencers. It's what they do. And so I think you're absolutely right to look at them and then learn from them. And I think, why not use their methods? If they are the methods that work, we would be foolish to use other methods. I know that's a really good method, but I'm going to use a worse method. I'm going to try and persuade you by using a worse method. It's foolish to do that. So why not use their methods if they're, and in a way, this is when I was talking about the strength or whatever. And I said strength can mean many different things. Strength can mean how you come across, your charm. It can mean your glamour on your webpage, this kind of stuff. These are kind of sources of strength. So why not use them? Now there's obviously a big caveat here, which is the ethical side of it. The sort of, what are we using these methods for? Are we using them to get them to buy our product, even though we know our product is a load of rubbish? Or are we getting them to use less plastic or whatever it might be, or to, I don't know, save more puppies or whatever it might be, but something more charitable, something perhaps everybody might agree is a more ethical kind of cause. And so I think it's unfair to ask the good guys to use the methods that don't work and only allow the bad guys to use the methods that do work. So why not use those methods, but always have the question in mind around the ethics of what you're trying to persuade them to do. And I think a couple of questions that can kind of help in that respect is, if somebody did this to you, would you be okay with it? And perhaps even more powerful, depending on the situation, if somebody did this to your mum, would you be okay with it? If somebody used this method on your mum, would you kind of go, oi, back off, that, that's wrong, kind of thing. Whereas if you don't, you say, no, actually, I'd be perfectly happy for them to use that method on my mum. well, then perhaps it's an ethical thing and it's okay. I do think we should use critical thinking, absolutely. And how do we encourage more critical thinking? It's using these methods. You know, with all of these things, it's using these methods. We will get telling people through logic and such like to be more critically to think more critically, etc. Will work for some people, but it won't work for others. For others, it's going to be. There was a great. It was a great example of this. I can't remember who it was, but it was an actor. Ashton, who's that guy? Ashton
Kutcher.
Ashton Kutcher, and he gave a kind of a speech to a university, to the alumni or the graduates at a university, and he was talking about being sexy, and he said the most sexiest thing in the world for him is intelligence. And so what he was kind of using sexiness to get people to be intelligent. Fantastic. You know, how fantastic is that? And that's how we'll get that change. That's how we'll bring that change about.
And another question, would you position an outcome in a very positive light or stress the negative aspect of not changing behavior?
Really good question. And I might do both. I might, excuse me, it depends on what I thought of their personality type. If I thought their personality type was largely risk averse, then I might well frame it in terms of the negative aspect of not changing the behavior. If I thought their personality type was, they had a higher risk tolerance, they were more about, come on, let's go and get it, let's achieve this thing, they're more goal getting, then I would probably put it in a positive light. If I wasn't sure, I might do a bit of both. I might say, hey, let's do this and this, because we're facing a bit of a problem at the moment. So unless we do this, X is going to happen, and really don't want that to happen. But the good news is that if we do it, it's going to put us in a really good position to enable us to do this. And then I've kind of got both. I've got both.
Good idea. And here's one more. In some work contexts, the power/strength balance is tipped by seniority. How can someone who is less senior tip that balance in discussions or negotiations?
Yes, very, very good. I would say aim high. I would say look for clues. I would say listen, listen, listen. I would say be strong. And I would say co-create the solution. And I would say it in the right way. It's everything in that book. You know, the book is laden with things that work for exactly that situation where the power is against you. How do you get them to change their mind? Every page has got half a dozen tips. So it is exactly that. I can't say more than that, basically. So.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen again. Hopefully we can see that. So this is just, if people want to stay in touch with Simon, they can visit his website. They could also follow him on LinkedIn. I understand you've got lots of great resources on your website, negotiation-mastery.com. And there's a negotiation toolkit and lots of great videos from the interviews you did for the book. So yeah, please go visit. And thank you to everyone who's attended. I hope you've all learned something, and I hope you'll all sort of check out the book and the sample chapter on the book club website. And thank you to everyone for attending and anyone who's watching this on demand. Our next session is on Thursday, the 25th of August at 2 p.m. UK time. And our book of the month will be Stand Out by Deborah Stevens. And Deborah's session will be on how to maximize your influence at work. So sort of slightly related to this topic. So hopefully, if you sign up to the mailing list, we might see you again next time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.